Hey, discerning listeners, 90 Day Fiancé, let's watch.
I can't go on with somebody just like disregarding me or just like laughing or I can't go on with that. I feel like I have to stand up for myself. Who cares if he's mad? I'm angry too. After how tonight went, everything is on the line. The trip to Sokoto, my relationship, I feel like it's all on the line now.
So we can all learn from this. We've all been here before. Maybe you're in this situation right now where you had a conflict with your partner or someone close to you, and you had that initial blow up, if you will, or transgressions occurred both ways or something. So I guess we could say there's different phases to a conflict, right? That there's the triggering that will happen. And for her, it was when she asked for more information about the polygamy, marrying other people and kids, and she was told information that she didn't expect. Now, you could blame him for not being more forthcoming, or potentially for deceiving. It's hard to know exactly. Or you could blame her for being naive or deluding herself into thinking something that no one else thought. Everyone else hearing the information that she had figured it was much more involved than what she was figuring. But, we're all like this, particularly in the beginning of a relationship. We all delude ourselves, to some extent. Or at least it's common to do that. When you're infatuated with someone, you will let things go. You will look past things. And later on, at some point, you have to face the reality. Anyway, so she's at that situation, and she handled it badly because she was physical with him, which is not okay. You could argue that he had some issues as well. He's being flippant, but I can't tell if he's uncaring or pushing her away on purpose, trolling her, or he's just coming from his cultural background. He's just coming from his cultural place that for him, when he suggests, it'd be better. Maybe if I married 3 people, it would be better for you, given what you're wanting. To her, it seemed like he was making a joke of it, but from his standpoint, it could have been him legitimately actually trying to make a compromise. Anyway, so that happened. That's the triggering for her. And then she has the explosion or the transgression or the initial overreaction or something. It's pretty common, right? You want to keep that to a minimum, of course. There are ways to manage that to remain as differentiated as possible. One of the best things you can do in that initial phase is to get distance, which she almost did without abusing him. She stood up. I was about to applaud her for that. I was like, yep, she's escalating. He's not really listening to her. She's seemingly really losing it. So she was like, look, I'm out of here. And I was like, okay, good. Just get away. That's the one of the best things you can ever do in a situation like that is to take a break. Now, if you're the distancer in the relationship and you have a pursuer for a partner, you always want to say to your partner, I'm freaking out right now and I need a break, but we'll return to this conversation in 30 minutes or something, but I'm freaking out, right? It's really important if you're an avoider, if you're a distancer, to know that about yourself and also to communicate that, because usually distancers will just stand up and say, screw this noise, and it can come across like you don't care, and of course that will trigger the pursuer, preoccupied individual. So anyway, she stands up, she gets physical, not okay, she walks away, he pursues, tries to make it better. Now they're maybe in the second phase, you could call it, sort of a smaller phase of she's still triggered and he's trying to make up, he's trying to engage with her. She's like, no. And then now she's fully distanced and has time to think. And she's in this phase, which is, what do I do? Where am I right now? There's a lot of thoughts that will run through your mind, right? There will be a lot, depending on your differentiation level, on your attachment reactivity, depending on the situation, of course. But in typical good enough relationships, it's not uncommon in this phase to have some pretty delusional or distorted ideas about what's going on in the relationship and what your partner is like. It's not uncommon in this phase to absolutely conclude with no uncertainty that your partner doesn't care about you, doesn't love you, is a horrible, narcissistic, malignant, psychopathic, horrible deceiver. it's not uncommon to believe that in that phase because it feels that way, but you have to be differentiated and look at that and say like, well, I'm in that mode right now. I've been triggered. And so I have to be very careful about believing things that aren't necessarily true. Now, it could be true. And if that's true, then absolutely get away from your partner. But we will have those thoughts in the situation. And then once we make up, we can't even imagine having those thoughts anymore because they just don't make any sense, right? It feels that way. We have to understand we are not computers. We are not androids. We're not like Data on the next generation. We cannot think logically. We are emotional animals with goo between our ears that are not very precise in its ability to gauge reality. So we just always have to be humble about our perspective, our take, our stance, our ideas, the thoughts that run through our head. You always just have to say, well, God knows what's really happening in my mind. Just along these lines is a similar issue. The older I get, one, my memory gets worse, but two, the more I am humble about my memory. Something will happen. Like recently someone emailed me and said that they had sent a package for the 14th anniversary show for us to open. And she was watching the live show and didn't see it show up. And so she emailed, she's like, did you get my package? I sent this and that. And at first I'm like, nope, never received it, because she described what she sent. And I thought, no, I don't remember ever seeing that. And then we thought, well, maybe it was still at the post office. So Stacy went to go get it. It wasn't there. And then Stacy comes to me. She's like, it wasn't there. So are you sure you didn't open it at some point? And I was like, no, I would remember that. It was the person, the deserving listener that was sending a package. She said it was Lego minifigures. And I thought, well, I would remember that. I mean, I don't know if you can see, but right here is I actually bought a custom display case for all my minifigures. That's right there. And so I looked in there and I'm like, I don't see any new ones. And plus I would remember, I would remember that. So, cause it's such a thing that I love, So, anyway, so I figured no, but then Stacy, my wife's like, she's like, are you sure? Because your memory isn't always the best. And I said, and I stopped for a second because I was gonna say no, I don't remember it, so it didn't happen. But then I thought, you know what? It's possible that it happened. Because in my head, if it happened, it would have been within the last couple months, and it's not like 3 years ago or something. It would have happened recently. So I thought, well, I'd remember it, right? But then I thought, you know what? There's a chance that I did open a package. I did open the minifigures. I didn't realize it was for the 14th, and it could have been a duplicate minifigure. In fact, I have a vague memory of opening something like that where it was a duplicate Lego minifigure, and I put the minifigure in some other storage because it's like I don't need duplicate minifigures, except I have a number of Lukes from Star Wars, different movie Lukes. Anyway, point is that I am trying to be more humble about the goo between my ears. It's not precise. It's not like a hard drive, or it's not, it doesn't work well. So all the time. So when we're in this phase, we want to be very careful about, because we have the thoughts and we have the ruminations and we have the upwelling of ideas. My partner is a horrible person. My partner doesn't care about my feelings. And then we want to look at those feelings to differentiate ourselves from those thoughts and feelings and say, is that accurate? Really? Is it possible that it's just because I'm triggered? Is it possible because I'm in a mood right now? In all likelihood, it is. Especially, one of the things that you can do is when you're not triggered, because that's, usually most of the time, hopefully anyway, is to note your thoughts and evaluation about your partner and really kind of lock it in to remind yourself so that when you do get triggered, you'll remember thinking thoughts that were the opposite of that you're having right now, and know that there's a chance that you're distorting. Now, having that realization doesn't take away the upwelling of feelings and the thoughts that run through your mind, but at least you're having some objectivity about where you're at. Because if you don't, then you might take action like breaking up with someone. I mean, think about Angela, who at the drop of a hat will break up with Michael and hate him and yell at him and abuse him and see him as this psychopathic scammer. And then when they make up, everything's fine. So it's not healthy for yourself. It's not obviously healthy for your relationship, or it's not fair to your partner. Plus, that amount of time that you live in that space where you're convinced that your partner doesn't love you and doesn't care about your feelings, even if it's just for 24 hours, that experience you will experience as reality. It'll feel real to you, and you'll internalize it as if it actually happened. You'll have a sense, your body doesn't know when you're distorting, and so you're living in an alternate reality, some of the time, in which your body is believing, because you're convinced of it and you don't counter it at all, that your partner doesn't love you. And that starts to get underneath your skin. It starts to become the rule instead of the exception over time, right? It's sort of like dreams will sometimes feel very real, or visualizations along those lines, just to demonstrate in terms of reducing it down to some scientific experiment we can do, is that when you ask people, there's been many studies in various different realms, but when you take basketball players, and I remember doing this when I played basketball as a kid, that they found if you practice in your head shooting free throws without actually moving, you're just closing your eyes and imagining, the routine, and you do the shot, and you make it. You always make sure you make it in your imagination. You make the shot. You don't just go, I made a shot. You actually kind of imagine what it would be to make the movements and everything. And they found that when you do that over time, on average, people will actually get better at shooting free throws, even though they never actually did it physically. So the idea is that when we imagine things, that it becomes real to us. It becomes, our body doesn't know necessarily when we're imagining something or when it's real. And so that's another reason why you want to be careful in a situation, because you can almost ruin your love for someone because you don't push back on the distortions that you have in the moment. And then over time, you truly will fall out of love, and then you're more reactive, you're less likely to give them the benefit of the doubt. And if both people are doing this, then of course that's what can happen to a breakup. In fact, I could say with some confidence that most, if not all, breakups involve this to some extent. Along those lines, almost every breakup that I've ever witnessed, professionally or personally, I thought to myself, especially later on in my career, that it could have been prevented if things had gone differently earlier on in the cycle of conflict that developed, way back. So, because it's often concluded that it's like, well, we weren't made for each other. And, it's possible, but it's not usually how I see things. Anyway, point is that we can look at it as, so, okay, what's going on? And we can and with her last week, we heard her kind of debating in her mind. She could hear her kind of reacting to statements that because I think a part of her was inside of her was saying, you're overreacting, or you should have known better from the beginning. But outwardly, verbally, she'd be kind of fighting with those statements, like when she'd say, well, what else am I supposed to do? Because no one else was yelling at her. She was having this kind of debate in her mind and voicing one part of it. By the way, so then this phase, you have the space to differentiate. You have some time to think. You can, and if you can't, then sometimes a strategy is to not think about it. It's just, if it's like so overwhelming and you can't differentiate, then sometimes it's recommended that you just take a break from thinking about it. Maybe you just watch Netflix or whatever, So until your body kind of recovers from the stress hormones and everything, get a good night's sleep, wake up the next day, that sort of thing. Anyway, so because the idea is that if you're trying to make up, or even if you're in her situation and you just want to break up in a ethical manner, then you have to have some differentiation, and you have to come at your partner with some level of level-headedness. And if you made a mistake, like physically harming him, like she did, then you're going to have to apologize from the heart and be sincere and have, trust for the other person. So let's see how she manages that.
But I don't want to lose him.
Right. So just before we go next a little bit, I think that part of her, but I don't want to lose him, is that other part of her voice of just like, well, maybe I did something wrong, but I love him. And I think that probably comes from a place of, I think he might love me. I don't know if she would say that. So I think she's having that breathing room to kind of relax a little bit and to think about the consequences of what's happening.
I didn't come down here to be this unhappy. What am I here for?
Okay, not a terrible opener. It's not accusatory terribly. So that's another thing to think about is how do you open a re-engage? That's what she's hoping for. She's hoping that he will come to her. He's in the other room. She enters the hotel. She doesn't go to him. She sits in the other room. She says things, hoping that he'll hear. He'll come in. And that's what he's doing. So, there's obviously more healthy ways of doing this. She could have gone in there and said, by the way, I'm sorry that I physically harmed you. It's completely abusive, totally uncalled for, my fault. I'll pay for dry cleaning or whatever. I got to work on it. That really, just imagine your partner in a fight does that to you. That's a humongous yikes. And if you just look at it as a discrete moment, it's like, what's the big deal? It's just a shirt. Well, she really got him entire. Anyway, some of his outfits are pretty cool. A lot of the Nigerian clothes, I'm just like, why don't we dress like that? It just looks so, I don't know. It just looks so nice. It's like every outfit's like a painting or something. Anyway, so, if we just look at that event, it's like, what's the big deal? But of course it's a pattern and it's a message. It's an emotional message of, your body is up for grabs in conflict for me to harm, and watch yourself, because now it's a drink in your face, but later it could be my fist in your face. And it really is. That's the message of like, if you're gonna upset me, I will harm your body. I will try to do things to you. And that's like, what? Why? What? Why? It's so uncalled for. And if she had an impulse and she's sorry for it, then okay, but she's not, anyway. So she could have done that. There's much more healthy ways she could have reacted, but on average, people are pretty messy in this phase. So it's all just, if it ends well, then I guess it was an okay path. So he's coming over. Let's see how this goes. I think typically, with Lisa, he was fairly forgiving, and I think he's pretty flexible. There were times with Lisa, and I guess now with Kimberly as well, that he could absolutely just be like, you need to apologize for what you did before we move forward. But he doesn't usually. But he does reach a limit. In fact, even this scene, just the visuals are reminding me of that one scene. It was actually the very first scene I saw, one of the very first scenes I saw of 90 Day Fiancé, because just a side note, I was watching Love is Blind, and then it sort of took off on YouTube, and people were like, you got to watch 90 Day Fiancé. I'd never heard of it before. And it was season 4, episode 7. I don't know why that sort of gets locked in my head, but it's the season with Darcy and Tom and Yolanda and Williams and Dave and other. Anyway, so, and of course Usman and Lisa, and that was the anyway. So one of the very first scenes that I saw was when she was upset because Usman had gone off with his friend and she was left behind at the hotel. And when he got back, she was upset, which is okay. But her language, I just remember, was very concerning. She was saying things like, you better watch yourself. It was very abusive language, or it was worrisome. So I'm kind of worried, but I don't think Kim is as bad as Lisa in that way. Let's watch.
And I had every right to ask questions. I was more upset that I had to talk to somebody that's in a totally different relationship than the one we would have been in. This guy, his 2 wives live together. Like, that's crazy to me. I don't relate to that.
I'm sorry. I'm telling you, I'm very sorry.
Okay, again, not the healthiest, but there's not a lot of huge problems here. She's reiterating, she's calmer, she's sitting, so she's indicating she's willing to engage. Neither one of them have eye contact. He particularly doesn't. And then she's like, I was trying to ask questions and I shouldn't have been treated like that. And it's just like, okay, that's how she sees it. That's not the way I saw it. But anyway, then of course I see an edited version and I'm not there. But so now he's saying, I'm sorry. Let's see what he follows it up with.
Than when the one we would have been in. This guy, his two wives live together. Like, that's crazy to me. I don't relate to that.
I'm sorry. I'm telling you, I'm very sorry for anything that you see happened and you feel like.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, but I'm just telling you, if really we love each other, then we'll find a way to live with each other. But the way you just like anything that comes to you, then you just carry something up. This is the second time you did that in Zanzibar, now you do it here.
Yeah. Well, okay. So we'll see how this goes. We'll see how she reacts to this. I would hope she would apologize and be like, yeah, it's not okay for me. So he's expressing his side of the thing. And this is very common. It is risky because essentially they're both saying, you're a jerk face. And then he's saying, I'm sorry, but you're a jerk face. It risks escalating again, one step at a time, one topic at a time. He said, I'm sorry. He could let that breathe. That's always the thing to think about, is like, let it breathe a little bit. So you have 3 bullet points that have been rolling around in your head, ready to go, but give it, every step has to be followed so that for it to go well. So for him, he could be like, okay, I'll put my 3 bullet points aside. So Kimberly, you're saying that it was surprising to you about this. My friend was proposing a model for polygamy that honestly is what I was kind of hoping for, and I thought you would agree to, but apparently you hadn't. And okay, I respect that. But so anyway, I'm sorry about that, but I think we just had a big misunderstanding. I don't feel like I was trying to trick you or anything. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. I think he was avoiding telling her more upfront stuff. I mean, why wouldn't, they've had conversations for, I think, months about this. You'd think at some point he'd be like, okay, I got to sit you down and you say you agree to me marrying other people, but I got to tell you, like, what that means exactly, because I'm not sure if you exactly know what that means. And if it's a deal breaker, we got to end this now. Because I think he was telling her this information before they even met in person, right? Because I seem to remember Kimberly, before she even got on the plane, that she was saying that she was okay with him marrying other people. Anyway, because maybe she watched the Lisa episodes. Anyway, so then he does a little bit of that, but then quickly goes to his points. Now, she'll probably come back with, but you're a jerk face, instead of addressing what he's saying. So let's watch.
Then you did the water, now you do the milk. That's not right.
I threw this stuff because you never let me finish a thought. And I felt like you made me look stupid in front of your friend.
Yeah, so she's right back at this, like, you never let me finish a thought. It's just not true. I mean, unless we saw some weird edit or something. And plus, like, what thought were you trying, she could have, he was pretty persistent about trying to get things out. There wasn't an emergency that she had to get thoughts out. She could have been like, okay, well, he's coming at me with a lot of things, so I'll wait for him and I'll calm down and eventually I'll get to my thoughts, or we'll talk about this another time or something. It wasn't an emergency, like it had to be discussed. It's fine if she felt talked over and that sort of thing, but it certainly doesn't justify putting hands on.
That's not right.
I threw this stuff because you never let me finish a thought. And I felt like you made me look stupid in front of your friend.
Right, and then the other thing she says, which is very much akin to what Angela will say, which is this making me feel like a fool. I think Kimberly has a lesser version of it, but it's there, it's noticeable that she will see the world through that lens. I mean, we all do to some extent, but I think she goes there really quick. This notion of like, I'm being made a fool of. And then, interestingly, she tries to make a fool out of him by, dousing him with a drink or something, because it feels like, I'm going to humiliate you. I'm going to splash this all over you. I could go into the details as to why it would have those associations. But anyway, so Angela does this to a greater degree, and it's just, I'm pretty sure she must have had some traumas, relational traumas that had the flavor of humiliation. we've all been humiliated to some extent in our lives, but some of us have been much more humiliated than others. Maybe even humiliated routinely, chronically, abusively by our own families, by our own parents. Parents who will ridicule, parents who will make fun of children and say, you're ridiculous, or just give that vibe. So, of course, if we have those traumas, then we're going to have a schema around, I am a fool. And then you only have a few different ways of dealing with that schema of, I am a fool. I am inherently humiliating as a creature. And so how am I going to deal with that? Some people will lean into it and become more humiliating. You might actually see these individuals online on TikTok or something purposely making videos that will incur a lot of humiliation to them. It's just like, well, I surrender. I'm a fool. I'm an idiot. I'm ridiculous. I'll just lean into it. At least I have power over it. Another way of dealing with it is to avoid any situation in which humiliation could happen. So that, it's an avoidant strategy. Maybe the individual only does things in which they shine, or they just avoid even being around other people, that kind of thing. So that's one strategy. And the third strategy is what Angela and what Kimberly seem to do, which is to try to get out ahead of the humiliation and also to humiliate others preemptively. Because in their mind, they're like, well, if someone else is being humiliated, then I will be spared humiliation, which of course does not work, right? And that's the nature of schemas and of maladaptation to those schemas, is that the coping mechanism that we develop often will cause the problem to happen even more. Abandonment schemas, one way of trying to deal with the schema of I am abandonable, everyone will abandon me, is to become extremely angry and hypervigilant around abandonment, preoccupation, borderline, this kind of thing, which will cause other people to actually leave us, and thus we will be abandoned. So the humiliation schema that I think she has is, causing more humiliation to her. And going on a reality TV show, Angela and Kimberly, talk about exposing yourself to humiliation, right? So you just have to wonder what's going on, and also hopefully that she can get help for that, so that she because every time she humiliates herself, and, it could be argued she's not really doing that, but you could see it that way, that she feels actually as if she's humiliatable and inherently humiliating, and it reinforces that schema, which causes more need to try to humiliate other people, or to, actually come to think of it, this could play a role in a lot of that both of them are dating men in Nigeria and also wanting to go on a reality TV show. And you just wonder if in their mind they're thinking, well, I will get a younger, flashier, attractive guy, and that will make it so that I will not be humiliatable. And I will also, in my mind, I think if someone needs a green card, then I will have the upper hand, so I can avoid being made a fool of. And also, for Kimberly in particular, if I'm with Usman, then he's a star. He's a pop star in her mind, and thus I could never be humiliated for that, because it's such an elevation. It's the opposite of humiliate. It's like elevating to my status, right? So it's the opposite direction. And you just have to wonder about, and then I'll go on a reality TV show, and everyone loves a TV star. So it's all this effort to try to avoid being humiliated, but of course results in the opposite, right? So I don't know. It's just interesting to think about. And then the need for this to work out, and the self-distorting, the self-deluding, right? It's like, well, if I need this to work to avoid my deep fears about myself, then I will ignore all the writing on the wall, right? I will ignore the fact that he wants to marry other people, for both of them, right? I will ignore the fact that we're from totally different cultures. I will ignore the fact that there's a chance that they're only in it for the green card. I will ignore the fact that it's hard to get to know someone long distance like this. I will ignore the fact that even if we do manage to get married, it will be very hard to actually see each other because we're on opposite sides of the planet. I will ignore the fact that if they come to the States, it might be very hard for them to work, which will mean that I will be supporting. There's a lot of things one has to ignore, but if you're super desperate for something to work, then because you're trying to overcompensate for some kind of schema, then you'll try it.
That's how I felt.
At the time that we are about to go and meet my family, and that's when you do this, no. If this is how it's gonna go, fine, we don't have to get married, we don't even have to be in a relationship. Just go and live your life, then let me go and live my life. I think that would be better.
Interesting. So he's saying, well, maybe we should just not be together. And I think that's wise, given, I think, the deal breaker that each of them have that is not compatible. There's no Venn diagram of their possible futures, right? And I wonder how she's going to react to this. Now, and then you think, well, what's going on with Usman? Is because it comes across like he never really loved her, because you'd think he would fight harder or try harder or be more devastating. It's pretty quick to being like, okay, well, I guess that didn't work. It's over. Could be that I never really cared. But, I think another option, given that we've learned a little bit about his polygamy hopes and what is typical, that for him, he was raised this way, or it's the model of what is being presented to him, that wives are individuals that you entertain to some extent in terms of closeness and making them feel special. But in the end, you're really just acquiring family members who will have your kids, right? The way that he would talk about these future possible other wives, the way he talked about who these people were, it just doesn't sound like, well, if he said something like, well, I will be dating other people, the way that polyamorous people talk about things, they'll just be like, well, a connection, we'll see what they want, this kind of thing. It doesn't come across that way, right? So for him, Kimberly, he might enjoy to an extent, but he's like, in the end, I don't have to spend that much time with her. And she's a good person to have kind of on the roster, if you will, because of the clout and the, how the money or whatever he saw, opportunities for for his own kids to go to the States and have a better life. He did kind of hint at that last episode, like, my kids will come live with you, or I can't remember what he was saying, but so it's hard to know exactly what's going on, but it's possible that for him, this whole time he's heading into it just like, well, yeah, I hope it works out, because of the 5 women that I will marry, this is a good one out of 5 to have for various reasons. But if it doesn't work out, who cares? Because I'm going to be marrying a number of women in my life, and what's the big deal? Whereas for her, of course, she's looking for the love of her life, right? She's looking for that soulmate and someone that considers her to be a soulmate, right? So then I suppose another option is that he really did and does love her, but is being objective and differentiated about it right now. Just like, well, I really want it to work, but it doesn't sound like we're compatible, so let's just get out while we're behind, if you will. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.